This will be the second message on John chapter 2. Last Sunday we covered the first 11 verses, talking about the marriage feast in Cana and the first miracle that Jesus performed, public miracle. But there's a major mood switch that's going to happen here between the events of verses 1 through 11 and then 13 through the end of the chapter. Actually, both events could have been very joyous events. Now, the wedding, of course, you're expecting that to be a joyous event, people eating and drinking, and now they've got plenty to drink because Jesus turned about 150 gallons of water into wine, so there's plenty to drink. And there's the congratulations of the newlyweds, and it's just a time of it's a fun type spirit at a wedding. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, verse 13 it says. And this was to be a time of great celebration. It would be a time that would mark or cause them to remember the deliverance that God had given to His people in the wilderness. Well, they were in Egypt, but they were headed to the wilderness. God wanted to get them out of Egypt. And remember all the plagues that had come upon Egypt land, Pharaoh in particular, but his land. And Passover revolved around the last plague. It was the one that literally broke Pharaoh down and allowed him to decide to let the people go. And of course, Pharaoh wanted to keep the Jews right where they were because he had slave labor. It was great. They served him. They built cities for him. They were a real asset. And as hard as the other plagues were, up to this one, they were all horrible. Pharaoh still wanted to keep the Jews there, and he endured those plagues because, again, he didn't want to lose his labor force. The last plague was, as I said, going to be the game changer. It was the death of the firstborn all throughout the land of Egypt. And even it would have been where the children of Israel were. But the Israelites were warned. They were told that there was a remedy in order to avoid the death angel, and it was to slay an animal, an innocent animal, a lamb preferably, drain its blood into a vessel, and then to paint the blood on the two side posts of the doors of their houses and upon the lintel across the top. The application of blood marked or identified God's people, and the death angel passed over that household. And after all that these people had seen in the other plagues, don't you think that little Jewish wife was out there telling her husband, hey, you missed a spot, telling him, how to do it. Or if I'm painting around the house, my wife said, it needs a second coat, I mean, you could just kind of imagine how all that went down. Now, I don't really intend to go in quite this far with the first phrase of John chapter 2, verse 13, which says the Jews' Passover was at hand. Jesus is the once for all Passover lamb. John the Baptist did, after all, claim him to be what? The Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Then we get to the book of Hebrews chapter 9, and there's quite a few verses there. I'll just pick a couple. 12. Chapter 9, verse 12, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, he entered the most holy place, once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. Wow. And then verse 14 continues, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works. You can insert the word religion there. That's not in the text, okay, by the way. To serve the living God. The prep for the Israelites, was the application of blood. And the prep for leaving this world, for us, leaving this world and expecting a good eternal outcome, revolves around the bloody sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, and are by faith accepting that as the complete payment for our sin. So Passover ultimately pointed to the one perfect Passover to come. So I guess I'm really puzzled by people who want to play fast and loose or play Russian roulette with their souls. I don't get that. Now, Jesus went up to Jerusalem after spending a short stint in Capernaum. Look at verse 12. That's kind of an intermediary verse. The verse 11, the beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brethren and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. They were just there a short time, in other words. This should have been a joyous occasion, coming to Jerusalem, coming there for Passover. This was to be a really joyous celebration of God's deliverance. And guess what? Jews still celebrate it today. Still celebrating Passover after all these years. He found in the temple a real mess going on when he arrived. So what temple was this? Well, it certainly wasn't Solomon's temple, because that had been long destroyed. Nor was it the temple rebuilt by the Jews. You think about Ezra, and that era. That one got destroyed too. This is actually the third temple. This is Herod's temple. Herod the guy's a heathen. Okay, understand, he's a heathen, but he wanted to curry favor with the Jews. So he thought, hey, I'll build them a temple. That'll make them loyal to me. So he built this temple. I have to say, it was kind of a slow walk getting this thing built. I mean, you're going to see right here in the text today that it took 46 years to build this temple. You wouldn't think it would take, that long, but it wasn't a passion of Herod. He was just doing it to placate the Jews so they would be, friendly to him. He was a politician. That's all I can say. It's very interesting, as he slow walked the building of this temple, it was going to be finally complete, and it was only going to stand for 6 years, and then it was going to be totally destroyed by the Roman general Titus in 70 AD. You can read the history in 70 AD. And, the Jews were able to hold Titus out of Jerusalem, and like every day they were able to hold off his invasion. It seems like he became more angry, and his intent was to go immediately to the Temple Hill, go to the very heart of the Jews, their temple, and destroy it. It's speculation that he demanded that the temple be burned. And again, speculation that he did it just really out of rage against the Jews. Just burn the temple. And then, you think he could have become very wealthy because there were so many implements and coverings on walls that were gold. It was a storage place for gold and silver in the temple. And it's kind of a legend. Okay, I'm just going to state it as it is because there's really not the evidence out there. But they claim that the gold melted in the fire, and it ran between the huge stones of the temple. And there was literally not one stone left upon another because the soldiers pried all the stones apart so they could extract the gold between the layers on the thing. This I know. If you go to Jerusalem today, I've been there, seen it. There are these stones, and they're probably almost as tall or as high as I am, maybe 15 feet long. So 6 feet, probably 5 feet wide, 15. They're all kind of random, different lengths. And they are all laid just helter-skelter on the ground, exactly where they fell when Titus destroyed the temple. And there's evidence that some of the stones were burned. There was fire involved. So it may not be too far of a stretch to think that's really how it happened. But those stones are still there. I think, to me, you go to the Holy Land and you're looking at stones that got tipped over in 70 AD. I mean, just think about that. I mean, that's old history. But this day, John 2 and verse 13, and the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up. Now you got to remember, Jesus had been to the temple before when he was an infant, right? And then when he was 12 years old, he was in the temple engaging the doctors of the law as a 12-year-old. He had not been in Jerusalem since that time, like 20 years. He had not been there. And boy, had things changed. This was likely, most scholars agree, this is probably the courtyard of the Gentiles. There were Gentile believers. There were Gentiles that accepted the God of Israel. And they would come, but they had their own courtyard, not separate from the Jews' courtyard. This was their own courtyard. And this seemed to be, probably this courtyard is where the Gentiles, or where these merchants had set up shop that we read about. And it likely was so crowded that the Gentiles really had nowhere to go. There was just no place for them. Historically, we know that the merchants, in the beginning, they would sell sacrificial animals, and they would exchange currency, foreign currency, for Jerusalem currency at an exorbitant rate. These guys were in it for money. It was a very profitable money-making thing. And this is supposition, but they were located just below the Mount of Olives outside the city of Jerusalem. They were all there. So people wanting to come to the temple and worship, and they needed a sacrificial animal. And many times the priests were in cahoots with the merchants. They would say, "We're sorry that the animal you brought is not a really suitable sacrifice. It's not good enough, and you need to go buy one that is, or trade this one in, and plus some money." And those merchants would just turn around and sell the animal that was turned in, put it right in the mix and do that. There was nothing wrong. It was just a big money-making cabal. But I kind of picture what happened is one merchant decided to move a little closer to the city, and then the other merchants could see that he was getting a little more business because he was closer to the temple. Well, they went, well, that's not good. So another merchant left up there and came and went a little bit closer to the city. And pretty soon it's like a big leapfrog thing, and they are at the gates of the temple. All of them are there. That's the picture we find here when Jesus showed up. And again, it's supposition, that's how it happened, but we know from history they started out just below the Mount of Olives, and they ended up right in the city. So they're here hawking their wares, and when Jesus came, he found in the temple, and it's kind of the temple complex, we'll look at the words here in a minute. He found those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and the changers of money sitting. They'd set up shop. They were there. Stalls of animals. You can imagine the noise and the bleating and the lowing of the things. And you can imagine here is the place of worship. It was a place where the Gentiles really came to worship. It was their place, but it had been taken over. Money changers exploiting the people. They were the exchange rate was horrible, overpricing the animals, charging exorbitant rates of exchange. That's what was going on. I thought, wow, kind of served as a metaphor for what was the general spiritual condition of Israel at this particular time. No one had been standing up to the commercialization of Passover, what the temple was all about, a place of sacrifice, a place where people could be drawn near to God, and it all become commercialized, but nobody had been standing up. It's kind of like, we look at some of these absolutely stupid politicians, right? And we go, man, they are the dumbest people on planet Earth. But they're not so dumb as the people that elect them, right? And they had just allowed this stuff to go on and on and on, and nobody had stood up. That's the situation. Well, Jesus showed up, and in verse 16, he said unto them that sold doves, take these things thence, make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. The English word merchandise here is kind of an interesting word, or the Greek word. It's derived from the Greek word, emporion. And we get our word emporium from that Greek word. And an emporium is like a large marketplace. Today we might call it, it's like a farmer's market. It's like a swap meet. It's kind of that sort of flavor. If you think that Jesus was a weak man, I do not believe what he did to those merchants was an act of his divine power. I think it was an act of his human power. And if you think that Jesus was a weak man, you'd be mistaken. I mean, if he exercised his power as God, he would have just smoked them all, right? They would have just been gone. Like, hey, what happened to all these people? But I'll tell you what, he was a strong man. Humble, but strong. He fashioned a weapon, it says here, a whip of cords, and single-handedly took care of the problem. I'd imagine some of those guys had welts on them from getting whipped. He drove them out. He meant business. The animals also were driven away by Jesus. Tables were overturned. You can see money flying all over, getting all mixed together. It was... Wouldn't you like to see the video of it? I think it'd really be kind of cool. I know, and probably some of you know, what angry adrenaline can do. And you hear about people doing extreme sports. They call them what? Adrenaline junkies, right? I'll give you a quick, I'm going to try to get through this, and Rachel can relate to this, my daughter. We owned a mobile home and some land north of where I was pastoring a church. And we it was 8 miles north, and we ended up moving into town, bought a house there. So we'd rent out the mobile home. It was on an acre. We had a lot of fun there, didn't we? We had animals, and it was, I mean, we were not really raised as farmers or ranch people. So, man, we had chickens, we had turkeys, we had stuff happening there. But we ended up renting this place out, and particular tenants that I had in there at the time were about 4 months behind on their rent. They kept making excuses. And I noticed it was the middle of the winter. It was like about this time of year, maybe January. I can't remember if it was January or February. But I'd drive by it, and I just noticed no activity whatsoever, no cars. No cars. There was like always cars there. So I pulled in one day, and it was kind of out in the country, and I let myself in. I knocked, nobody showed up. I let myself in and found out these people had abandoned the trailer, left all their stuff there, abandoned the trailer, left all the pipes to freeze. They had animals in the garage, rabbits in cages, left them all there to starve to death. There was a 50-gallon aquarium in the living room, and the fish were just frozen in place. I mean, it was a cold winter. Well, you know, to say that I was just a little bit steamed would be maybe an understatement. And I mean, you just don't do that to animals. You know, you just don't go off and leave them. And again, it was fortunate they left all of their stuff. So I went to town after I viewed that. And I went to town. We had one attorney in town, so I went to him. I knew him well. I said, what can I do? He said, well, this is what you need to do. He said, take all their belongings out of the trailer and store them off-site, inventory everything, store it off-site. And he said, come up with an amount for the damaged plumbing. I mean, everything froze. It was all copper pipes. Everything froze and broke. And add in back rent and send them a bill, all certified letters, and tell them they can have all their stuff back for this amount. So I went back over to the place, it's 8 miles, and I began the process of emptying the place out. And understand, I'm pretty steamed about the animals, particularly. That really bothered me. And I'm not real happy about the plumbing either, you know. So as I'm there starting to figure out what I'm going to move and take out of the house, I go to the middle bedroom, and there's a table. It has a whole stack of pornographic magazines on it. And that was one thing. But what really caught my eye, however, was this big Rolodex of like Polaroid pictures. And it was my renters in very graphic sexual engagement. But what really was disturbing was seeing their little kids involved in the pictures. And long story short, I ended up calling the sheriff's department, and they came, and I just took that stuff out to them, and they arrested the guy. He did a fair amount of jail time. Now remember, I'm already pretty steamed, okay? But when I saw those kids in those pictures, I thought, well, I'm going to start moving stuff. I'm going to start with the heavy stuff first. So what's like one of the heaviest appliances? Well, the washing machine. And I'm telling you, I was so angry with this whole thing that I literally wrapped my arms around the washing machine, picked the washing machine up. You know what they weigh. I walked out the back door, down about 3 steps, all the way across the double garage, and I put it, without stopping, I put it in the back of my 1962 Chevy pickup. When I got home, I couldn't even move the thing. But I mean, I had adrenaline just, coursing through my body. I mean, I was not happy. Jesus, when he saw the condition of the temple, was incensed so much that it seems almost he was superhuman, but in his humanity, it was like he was a superhuman at this point. He just had strength. He single-handedly cleansed that courtyard of this scourge that had come in. It's like nobody dared stand up to him. He just did it, and when they saw his passion and they saw his strength. And the verse, it's interesting, the verse that the disciples remembered was Isaiah chapter 69, verse 9. And it's kind of an obscure verse, but they remembered this verse. And look at verse 17. His disciples remembered that it was written, "The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up." And you know what? I'll come back to that in a minute, but it may seem like a small thing, but I don't know if you noticed that Jesus didn't say, "Don't make our Father's house a house of trade or merchandise." He said distinctly, "My Father's house." Like I say, it may be a small thing, but I think it